Thanks for joining us today, Mark. And we're going to talk about green or natural burial sites. More and more interest in that these days in the media and by the public as well, as I'm sure you know very much. So I thought I'd start with just a few things. With the city of Niagara Falls, you guys have a defined area in a cemetery for green burial, and can you tell us a bit about why that was developed?
Certainly, and you're absolutely right. The City of Niagara Falls, back in 2016 and into 2017, developed the region's first green or natural burial site. We've named it Willow's Rest, aptly named, as you can see, the large willow tree that stands behind me. Willow's Rest is just over 2 acres. It's a wildflower meadow, wildflower and grassy meadow. At the time of development, we planted upwards of, I want to say, about 400 trees. We've planted, and to this day now, we've planted over 600 trees in and around the area. We also planted 15,000 wildflower plugs and seeds, of course, all native. Native pollinators and native plants that were hand selected by one of our local natural habitat restoration specialists who's done work for conservation authorities across Ontario. So we had him join us, and over the span of a year, we developed Willow's Rest that will accommodate 736 full bodies. And we also developed a small cremation garden that will accommodate, I want to say, about 200 cremated remains, of course, in a biodegradable urn. And that area also serves as an infant burial ground as well.
I see. And when you developed that new part of the cemetery, was there a demand for it? Were people coming to the city asking for that?
Well, there's a bit of history there. So when I started with the city, my first job was actually managing the environmental portfolio. I was responsible for significant tree plantings, natural habitat restoration projects, eliminating the sale of plastic beverage bottles in all city facilities. So when I moved into cemeteries, I was already keenly interested in how I could carry that environmental energy into cemeteries. And I was quite intrigued to see that there's a significant overlap with cemeteries and the impact on the environment. And I believe I'd only been in cemeteries three or 4 years, maybe not even. And I was approached by a lady when I was supervising a funeral. I was approached by a lady, and she asked if we offered green burials. And at that time, of course, I had done some investigating, but I really hadn't truly delved into what a green or a natural burial was. And so that kind of started the ball rolling, and we actually reached out to the community through going to the farmers markets and environmental community fairs, and we started talking to people about green burials, and the interest already was overwhelming. And then, of course, when we posted a message in the newspaper saying the city of Niagara Falls was considering developing a natural burial site, we were immediately contacted by the Gone family. And I apologize. There's a bit of a story here, but it's worth sharing. And I believe when you speak to any manager who's been a part of the development of a green burial site, they'll always have that story that kind of connects the dots. Bert Gone was actively dying of cancer. He was about my age, in his 40s, actively dying of cancer, and he was adamant that he was going to be a green burial. And so at that time, we didn't have a site available. So he was making his arrangements at Coburg Union Cemetery, which is Ontario's first green burial site. And so when the Gone family heard that we were developing Willow's Rest, they immediately started calling us. And at that time, we were just in the initial stages. Long story short, I guess depending on perspective, we were able to develop Willow's Rest in a quick manner. Thanks to the BAO, we had approvals very quickly, and Bert died 2 weeks after we received approvals. And so he was our very first green burial, our very first natural burial. And we had about 150 people attend that funeral, and a lot of them attended the site, which at the time was a kind of an open field. We were in the midst of developing it. We had planted maybe 100 trees at that time. We hadn't planted the plugs or the seed at that point, and so there were a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity, and of course, the Gone family being very understanding and appreciative of what a natural burial is, they were able to take that opportunity at the time of the funeral to explain to 150 people why Bert made this choice, and how adamant he was that his final choice in this world was going to have a positive impact on the earth, and that he was willing to go to whatever lengths necessary to make that happen. So that's kind of I consider Bert our champion. Um, and of course, since that time, the interest and the number of phone calls we received, not just from people wanting to purchase, but from across Ontario, from communities, from councils, city or town councils, and from environmental groups looking to seek out information as to how they can develop their own natural or green burial sites as well. And so that's kind of been a pastime of mine, is helping through that as well.
Yeah, it's a very compelling story, and it sounds like the community got very engaged in it. Nothing like word of mouth, too. I'm sure people have talked
Absolutely.
about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
In recent years, let's say the last year or so, have you seen more people ask about it than you had in previous years?
Absolutely. And if I may, instead of just looking at the last year, I'll give you a snapshot of the last, say, 3 or 4. In 2020, let's say 2020 and 2021, our sales were, sorry, 2020, our sales were had grown to 11 or 12 lots per year, and that for me was wonderful because I recognized there was going to be a significant period of education. But we were already selling 11 or 12 lots per year in Willows Rest. In 2021, that spiked and was up to 30. And last year in 2022, we sold more than that. But absolutely, the phone calls that we're getting from communities beyond Niagara, from interested parties beyond Niagara, has grown exponentially. I would go out on a limb to say that I speak to people, at least 3 times a week. In fact, just prior to this, kind of glancing at my emails, just prior to this conversation, I received another email from a community looking to get some information. We've had families that have traveled from as far as North Bay, London, Kitchener, Hamilton to purchase here at Willows Rest because they identify or associate with what this natural burial site is.
Yeah, and that's a story that's playing out to some extent in other communities around North America and
Yeah.
in fact overseas as well.
Mhm.
But it sounds like Niagara Falls was maybe ahead of the curve in terms of developing this. And did that develop through the community, or was that something the city itself was already interested in?
I will carefully say that this was more so a community driven project. It was, and sorry, I say that the city was incredibly supportive, council was incredibly supportive, but of course it wasn't at first deemed as a priority project. And that's when I turned to the community and I said, is this something that would be of interest? And one of our local environmental groups, the Park and the City Committee, which is a committee of council, passed a motion, and they also took part of their funding and put it towards the planting of the trees, the first 75 trees that were planted in Willow's Rest. So this was certainly pushed by the community, and I think that's the case in so many of the developments that we're seeing across Ontario. Is it's the interested parties, the community groups, the environmental groups, that are coming forth to, whether it's a city or a town council or the cemetery management team, and they're asking that they develop their own site.
Yeah, that's interesting. So very much from the ground up is where the
Absolutely.
interest is coming.
Yes.
As you know, Mark, there's no definition in law for what a green burial or natural burial is. How would you define it?
Well, so in I I would define it based on the 5 principles that I think are widely recognized with respect to green or natural burials. Obviously the body is not embalmed, the body is not placed in or the body is placed in a shroud or a casket that is created of natural materials. We don't use vaults. So we're not introducing that concrete or fiberglass or metal into the earth. And the memorialization is reserved to a very single area, or a communal memorial as it's called, so that we're not introducing concrete and granite foundations throughout the section. And then, of course, the site is left in a very natural state, thereby conserving or developing a natural habitat. So those are kind of the principles of green or natural burials as recognized by the Green Burial Society of Canada and the Green Burial Council in the States. So we've essentially adapted those principles in Willow's Rest. And Yeah, so and I think what sets Willow's Rest aside from, say, the conventional section, from a physical standpoint, is that it's well, as you can see behind me, it's a very naturalized state. It's a wildflower meadow. You'll only see a few monuments that exist, and that's within the communal memorial section. And the site is left in a natural state.
What do people typically ask for when they're looking for a green burial at Willow's Rest?
Good question. I think families that are interested in green burial are, I think they recognize a few different features or components of green burial. They want to be returned to the earth. They want their body to give back to the energy or the cycle of life, if you will. And so they appreciate and they recognize that, there are times of the season where a natural burial site, Willow's Rest included, um, may not look as manicured or as clean as the conventional areas of the cemetery, because as the plant life dies or goes dormant, it's brown and it withers, and they recognize that and they understand that. So what they're seeking or what they ask for is the opportunity to be involved. They want to plant a tree instead of erecting a monument. They want to help backfill the graves at times.
Do you
They
have
want
rules about
to.
what sort of trees they could plant? I imagine everyone wanted a Colorado blue spruce.
Right.
It
Yeah,
would take up a lot of space fairly quickly.
we do actually. The
Um,
rules that we have for Willow's Rest, first and foremost, is they can't plant a tree over top of the grave because it would make it operationally impossible for us to continue the burials throughout the section. We've come up with the rule that as the row fills, or as the rows no longer need to be accessed, then we'll start planting over top of Willow's Rest. But for the time being, for people that would like to purchase a tree, a memorial tree, if you will, we encourage them to purchase a lot around the perimeter of Willow's Rest, or within that inner circle. And again, we work with them to define the type or the species of tree. So within that inner circle, we're working with families to plant, um, you know, um, red buds, eastern red buds, because they're an understory tree, they're a smaller tree, and they're a beautiful tree, obviously. So over top of the communal memorial section would be stunning. Around the perimeter, we've planted almost entirely all native trees. So whether it's oaks, tulip trees, maples, we have planted a number of pines. Oddly enough, or ironically enough, the only non-native trees that I believe are in there are the willows, because they were actually brought to Canada, I believe, 200 or 300 years ago.
That's interesting. And so, I mean, it looks beautiful now from the picture behind you.
Yeah,
It's going to look even better in years to come because of what's going on, right?
that's right. Yeah.
The growth.
It's been a learning curve for me. I love the environment, but there's so much to learn, and developing a natural habitat area is not as it's not easy. It has its challenges. Invasive species are complicated to deal with, but when you have the right people that are invested in this, and that's the other thing is green burials. The folks that we work with are fully invested in this, not just professionally, but personally. They're passionate about making this work. And so, yes, Willow's Rest is beautiful year round, and it will only get better as the plant life or the pollinators, the native species, really take hold of that, and they push all of the invasives out. It'll just be just a stunning place to visit.
And so for the city as the operator, is there more or less maintenance or what's involved in the maintenance that's different perhaps from a traditional cemetery?
Another great question. I would suggest or propose that it's significantly less maintenance. There is not zero maintenance. Let me be very clear. We do have students that go in and they selectively weed out some of the invasive species, whether it's bindweed or thistle. So they're in there hand pulling some of those invasive species. Today we had the natural habitat restoration specialist in there again, just again pulling some of the material, transplanting it. But for the most part, that's it. That's all the maintenance that is required. We might have to rake the stone dust pathway every now and then. Um, we may have to spray some vinegar in areas where the bindweed is growing. We will not spray chemical, but that's essentially the maintenance. We've conducted a controlled burn twice over the last 5 years, and that's just to try to help the native seed take a stronghold and push out the invasive species. But
And is
but
the
that's about
nature
it.
of it, does that mean, sorry to interrupt, but does that
No.
mean that there would be lower cost to the city in maintaining a natural burial site?
Absolutely. So
Right.
when I look at Willow's Rest compared to my conventional sections, over top of, and let's just look at an acre, over top of that acre, we have to operate a riding lawnmower. That riding lawnmower is $39,000, not including the oil and the gas and the maintenance that goes into it. It requires a staff person to be maintaining it, not only the mower but the site. We have multiple weed whackers that are operating on a daily basis. So all of that is eliminated in the natural burial section.
And is the cost to the consumer families, is that any lower or is it the same as any other burial site?
Well, if you'd asked me this question 6 months ago, I would say it was on par with the least expensive lot in our cemeteries. Now, Niagara Falls cemeteries underwent a review and recognized that our prices were not aligning with other municipal cemeteries. So, in fact, we raised our prices. So, a lot in Willow's Rest is still the same price as any other area of the city. So, yeah, still on par with the least expensive lot.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
And yeah, so you've got room to grow, even though you've got a lot of usage already at
Yes.
that cemetery site. How much of it is available percentage wise?
Oh, great question. I wish I had checked my numbers. So if we have 736 lots, and I'm going to say within the last 5 years, we must have sold just over 100 lots. So we still have, let's say 600 lots available. That being said, we do have, like I said, the interest continues to grow. So if we're, sorry, and I said 20, if we're selling 30 per year now, it will sell really quickly, actually. And what's interesting about green burials is it's getting back to a bit of how families used to purchase lots. So, uh, and again,
Yeah.
with perspective, a most recent interment in Willow's Rest was a very young lady. She was a horticulturalist, worked for the Niagara Parks Commission in her 20s. So when we interred her, her family en masse purchased lots around her, which is it's a very old tradition that we haven't seen in some time, where whole families are purchasing within the area,
Right.
and that's really wonderful to see because it resonates with all of them.
And interesting too. I mean, people were buried 150 years ago, no differently than a green burial. They just didn't call it
Exactly.
that, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's so true. I often joke when I'm meeting with families about Braveheart, the movie Braveheart. If they've seen that, they've witnessed a green burial.
Right, right. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Mark. Great
My pleasure.
information, and I think people will find this very interesting for their options when they decide.
Happy to help. Thank you very much for having me.